The apartment breathes around us in the dark. It's a small sound, barely there. The hum of the refrigerator cycling on, the distant whisper of traffic 3 stories below, the settling of old wood and paint that comes with a building that has housed too many young lives, too many quiet secrets. I lie still in the narrow bed we share out of necessity, not choice, though the distinction has blurred somewhere along the way. Miles is beside me, close enough that I can feel the warmth radiating from his skin without touching him. The mattress dips toward the center, a gravitational pull that draws us together despite my careful positioning at the very edge. I keep my breathing steady, measured, the way you do when you're pretending to sleep so convincingly that you almost believe it yourself. But I am awake. I have been awake for hours. The digital clock on a nightstand glows green in my peripheral vision. 2:37 in the morning. Miles shifted 20 minutes ago, turning from his back to his side, facing me now, though I cannot see his face in the darkness. I felt the movement through the mattress, felt the change in the air between us, the way the space contracts when someone is looking at you even when you cannot see them looking. I keep my eyes closed. I keep my body still. I breathe in through my nose, out through my mouth, the way my mother taught me when I was small and afraid of thunderstorms. Count to 4 on the inhale, hold for 4, release for 8. It's supposed to calm you, supposed to trick your nervous system into believing everything is fine. Everything is not fine. Miles exhales, a soft sound that could be a sigh or simply sleep. I have learned to catalog his breathing patterns over the months we have shared this space, this bed, this strange liminal existence where we are more than friends but less than lovers, more than roommates but afraid to name what we actually are. His breath changes when he dreams, becomes deeper, more rhythmic. When he's thinking, it catches slightly, holds for a moment before releasing. When he's about to speak, it quickens just a fraction. His breath quickens now. I feel him shift again, a small movement that brings him infinitesimally closer. The bed is too narrow for 2 grown men, really. We had joked about it when we first signed the lease, had laughed about taking turns on the couch, had promised each other we would figure something else out eventually. That was 8 months ago. We have figured nothing out, and somehow the arrangement has become permanent, unquestioned, necessary in ways I dare not examine too closely. The heating system kicks on with a gentle whoosh, and I use the sound to mask the way my breath catches when Miles whispers into the darkness. I love you. The words are so quiet, I almost convince myself I imagine them. They float in the space between us like something fragile, like smoke or morning fog, or the kind of confession that can only exist in the deepest part of night, when the world has gone to sleep and left room for dangerous truths. My heart pounds so hard I'm certain he can hear it. The sound fills my ears, drowns out the ambient noise of the apartment, makes me dizzy with its intensity. I focus on keeping my breathing even, on maintaining the fiction of sleep, on not moving a single muscle, even though every nerve in my body is suddenly violently alive. He said it into the void. Not to me, not expecting an answer. Into the darkness where words can disappear, can be taken back, can be forgotten by morning. It is the kind of love confession that allows for plausible deniability, the kind that can be dismissed as a dream or a misunderstanding or nothing at all. But I heard it. God, I heard it so clearly it might have been shouted. Miles is quiet now, his breathing settling back into the pattern that means he is thinking, processing, perhaps regretting. I want to reach for him. I want to turn over and look at his face in the darkness and tell him that I heard, that I have been awake, that the words are not lost in the void because I am here, I am listening, I am dying to respond. Instead, I lie still and count my heartbeats. 112, 113, 114. The silence stretches between us, thick and weighted with everything we have never said to each other. 8 months of careful friendship, of boundaries neither of us has explicitly drawn, but both of us respect with religious devotion. 8 months of movie nights where we sit just far enough apart on the couch, of grocery shopping together like a domestic couple, while maintaining the careful fiction that we are simply practical roommates splitting expenses of good-night conversations that last until dawn, but never cross the line in a territory that would require us to name what this is. What this has always been, if I'm honest with myself. Which I am not. Which I cannot be, because honesty would require acknowledgement, and acknowledgement would require choice, and choice would require courage I do not possess. Miles shifts again, and I feel rather than see him turn away from me, onto his other side, facing the wall. The movement creates distance between us, a pocket of cool air where his warmth used to be. I want to follow him, want to close the gap, want to press against his back and whisper the words back into his neck where they would be safe and secret and true. I do not move. I hold my breath and listen to him settle. Listen to his breathing gradually lengthen and deepen until I am reasonably certain he has fallen asleep. Only then do I allow myself to exhale fully, to relax the careful tension I have been maintaining in every muscle. But sleep does not come for me. I lie in the darkness and replay the moment over and over, examining it from every angle like an archaeologist with a precious fragment. The tone of his voice, tender and raw and slightly broken. The way he whispered rather than spoke, as though the words were too fragile for normal volume. The timing, well past midnight when defenses are lowest and truth has room to breathe. I love you. 3 words that change everything and nothing simultaneously. Because what can I do with them? What response is possible that would not shatter the careful equilibrium we have built together? He spoke them into the darkness, knowing I would not answer, perhaps hoping I would not hear. They were meant to be safe in their silence, unreciprocated and therefore uncomplicated. But I did hear. And lying here now with those words echoing in the space between us, I realize that everything has already changed whether I respond or not. The knowledge sits in my chest like a stone, heavy and permanent. I cannot unknow what I know. I cannot unhear what I have heard. The clock reads 3:15 when I finally close my eyes, though I do not expect sleep to come. Miles breathes steadily beside me, turned away but still close enough that I could reach out and touch him if I were brave enough. If I were someone different. If I were the kind of person who could hear love spoken in the darkness and respond with love in return instead of fear. Instead, I lie still and pretend I never heard anything at all. It is what I do best, the pretending, the careful construction of plausible deniability, the maintenance of safe distances even when sharing a bed too narrow for two. It is how I have survived 21 years without ever having to examine too closely the shape of my own heart, the direction of my own desires. But as I finally drift towards sleep in the early hours of morning, Miles's words follow me into dreams where I am brave enough to turn over, brave enough to speak, brave enough to love someone back without counting the cost. Morning comes too early and too bright. I wake to the sound of Miles moving through the apartment, the familiar rhythm of his routine that has become the soundtrack to my days. Coffee brewing in the kitchen, the shower running, the soft thud of textbooks being stacked on the counter. Normal sounds that should comfort me, but instead feel sharp-edged now, loaded with the weight of what passed between us in the darkness. I keep my eyes closed until I hear the front door click shut behind him, until his footsteps fade down the hallway toward the stairs. Only then do I allow myself to breathe fully, to stretch into the space he has vacated, to examine the morning light filtering through a single window, and wonder how everything can look exactly the same when everything has changed. My phone buzzes on the nightstand. A text from my mother asking if I am eating enough, if I am studying hard, if I have many nice girls at university. The questions arrive like clockwork every Tuesday morning, predictable as sunrise, each one a small weight added to the pile I carry everywhere. I type back the responses she expects. Yes, I am fine. Yes, I'm focused on my studies. Yes, I will call this weekend. I do not tell her that the only person I think about is my male roommate who whispers love confessions in the dark. I do not tell her that the life she has mapped out for me feels like a costume that no longer fits, like a language I am forgetting how to speak. The apartment feels different without Miles in it, though I cannot name exactly how. Quieter, certainly, but also somehow less solid, as though his presence is what holds the walls together, What makes this small space feel like home instead of just another temporary arrangement? I have lived in dorm rooms and childhood bedrooms and the back seat of my father's car during long family trips. But this narrow apartment with its second-hand furniture and leaky faucet is the first place that has ever felt like mine. Except it is not really mine. It is ours. The lease has both our names on it. But more than that, every corner of this space has been shaped by our shared existence. The couch where we spend most evenings, angled toward the small television we bought together. The kitchen table where we study, books and papers spreading across the surface like proof of our parallel lives. The bed we share out of economic necessity that has somehow become the most natural thing in the world, so natural that neither of us questions it anymore. I shower and dress and gather my things for class, following the routine that has carried me through 3 years of university. Literature major, steady grades, part-time job at the campus bookstore that pays just enough to cover my half of rent and groceries. I am what my professors call a solid student, what my parents call responsible, what I call invisible. I move through my days without making waves, without drawing attention, without giving anyone reason to look too closely at the careful construction of my ordinary life. But today feels different. Today I catch myself thinking about Miles during my Victorian literature seminar, wondering what he whispered to me instead of focusing on Tennyson. I find myself distracted during my shift at the bookstore, shelving novels about love and loss, and wondering if the authors ever wrote from experience or if they simply imagined what it might feel like to have someone speak those words to you in the dark. The bookstore is quiet in the afternoon, mostly empty except for the occasional graduate student browsing the poetry section. I like the work, the smell of new pages, the weight of books in my hands, the way knowledge feels when it is organized and cataloged and waiting to be discovered. Mrs. Chun, the owner, lets me take home damaged copies that cannot be sold, and over the months I have built a small library of stories with torn covers and coffee-stained pages. She finds me reorganizing the fiction section for the 3rd time today and gives me the look she reserves for students who are obviously avoiding something important. "You seem distracted," she says. "Boy trouble." The question hits closer to home than she could possibly know. I mumble something about midterm stress, and she nods knowingly, returns to her paperwork, lets me continue my nervous reorganization of books that were already perfectly arranged. Boy trouble. If only it were that simple. If only I could categorize what I feel for Miles as trouble, as something external that could be solved or avoided or overcome. But it is not trouble in the way she means. It is not the kind of problem that has clear solutions or expected outcomes. It is something else entirely, something I lack the vocabulary to name, even to myself. I finish my shift and walk home through the late afternoon light, taking the long way that leads past the coffee shop where Miles and I sometimes study together, past the park where we spent an entire Sunday last month reading in the grass while other students played frisbee around us. Everything looks the same as it always has, but I feel like an actor who has forgotten his lines, like someone moving through a familiar play with a completely different script. The apartment is still empty when I return. Miles has late classes on Tuesdays, will not be home until after 7. I should use the time to study, to work on the paper about romantic poetry that is due next week, to call my parents back and assure them once again that I am living the life they have imagined for me. Instead, I sit on our couch and stare at the wall and try to understand what happened to me overnight. How 3 whispered words can rewrite the story I have been telling myself about who I am, about what I want, about what is possible in a life I thought was already decided. The silence feels different now. It feels full of words waiting to be spoken, questions waiting to be asked, truths waiting to be acknowledged. And underneath it all, the growing certainty that something has shifted permanently between us, that Miles and I cannot go back to the careful friendship we have maintained for so long. The door will open soon. He will come home with textbooks and takeout and the easy smile that makes everything feel normal again. We will eat dinner together and study at the kitchen table and watch television until we are both too tired to keep our eyes open. We will brush our teeth and turn off the lights and lie down in our narrow bed. And perhaps he will whisper those words again into the darkness. And perhaps, this time, I'll be brave enough to whisper them back. 3 weeks pass before Miles mentions the cabin. 3 weeks of careful normalcy, of morning coffee shared in companionable silence, of studying together at the kitchen table while maintaining the precise distance we have always maintained. 3 weeks of pretending that nothing has changed while everything shifts beneath the surface like tectonic plates, finding new positions. He has not whispered those words again. I have not acknowledged hearing them the first time. We exist in a strange suspension, both of us too aware of what has been said and too afraid to disturb the fragile peace we have reconstructed around it. But I catch him looking at me, sometimes when he thinks I am not paying attention, and I wonder if he catches me doing the same. The invitation comes on a Thursday evening in March. We are grading each other's essays for our respective literature classes, a ritual we established early in our friendship that has somehow become as essential as sharing meals or splitting the electric bill. Miles reads my analysis of Whitman, while I review his interpretation of Joyce, both of us sprawled on opposite ends of the couch with papers scattered between us like evidence of our parallel academic lives. He finishes reading and sets my essay aside, looks out the window at the rain that has been falling steadily since morning. I have been thinking, he says, his voice carefully casual in the way that means he has been rehearsing this moment, about taking a trip somewhere, just for the weekend. I glance up from his paper, a red pen frozen in my hand above a particularly dense paragraph about stream of consciousness. My heart does something irregular behind my ribs, though I cannot say why. Weekend trips are not unusual between friends. College students take weekend trips all the time. There is nothing inherently dangerous about the suggestion. What did you have in mind? I ask, and my voice sounds normal, unaffected, as though I have not spent 3 weeks replaying his whispered confession in the spaces between sleep and waking. Miles shrugs, but I know him well enough to recognize the careful choreography of his casual gestures. My cousin has a cabin about 3 hours north, he says, near a lake. He is not using it this weekend, said I could borrow it if I wanted. I thought it might be nice to get away from campus for a while, study somewhere quiet. The suggestion hangs in the air between us, innocent enough on its surface, but weighted with implications neither of us names. A cabin, just the two of us. No roommates down the hall, no professors expecting attendance, no carefully maintained routines to hide behind. The kind of isolation that strips away pretense, that makes conversation inevitable. I should say no. Every rational part of my mind knows this. The same instinct that has kept me safe for 21 years, that has helped me navigate the narrow path between who I am expected to be and who I might actually be, tells me that accepting this invitation is dangerous. That spending a weekend alone with Miles in a remote cabin is exactly the kind of situation that leads to conversations I am not ready to have, admissions I am not prepared to make. Instead, I hear myself saying yes. The word emerges before I can stop it, before I can apply the careful analysis I usually bring to decisions that might alter the trajectory of my carefully controlled life. Yes, I say that sounds nice. What were you thinking? Relief flickers across Miles's face so quickly I almost miss it. This weekend, he says, we could leave Friday after classes, come back Sunday evening. Just 2 days. Just 2 days. As though time can be contained, as though the weekend exists in a bubble separate from our regular lives, as though what happens at the cabin will stay at the cabin and not follow us back to our narrow bed and share morning coffee and the careful distance we maintain while studying together. But I have already agreed, and backing out now would require explanations I am not prepared to give. So I nod and return to grading his Joyce essay, and we spend the rest of the evening planning the logistics of our escape with the kind of practical efficiency we bring to grocery shopping and bill paying and all the other mundane negotiations of shared living. Friday arrives gray and drizzly, the kind of late winter day that makes the idea of a warm cabin seem like salvation rather than dangerous territory. I pack a bag with the same care I bring to everything else. Extra sweaters, books for studying, the notebook where I sometimes write thoughts I am not ready to speak aloud. Miles loads his car with groceries and firewood and the kind of weekend supplies that suggest he has been planning this longer than his casual Thursday evening suggestion implied. The drive north takes us through small towns and farmland, past roadside diners and antique shops, and the kind of rural landscape that exists in the spaces between destinations. Miles handles the car with the same quiet competence he brings to everything else, and I find myself studying his profile as he drives. The way concentration softens the angles of his face, the way his fingers tap against the steering wheel in rhythm with whatever song plays quietly on the radio. We talk about ordinary things during the drive, classes and professors and plans for spring break, movies we want to see and books we want to read, and whether the baseball season will be worth following this year. Safe topics that require no emotional investment, no dangerous revelations, no acknowledgement of the tension that sits between us like a third passenger. But underneath the casual conversation, I am acutely aware of the distance closing between us and whatever awaits at the cabin. Each mile takes us further from the carefully constructed boundaries of our shared apartment, from the routines and distractions that help us maintain the fiction that we are simply friends, simply roommates, simply two young men who happen to share a bed for economic reasons rather than emotional ones. The cabin appears through the trees like something from a postcard, all weathered wood and large windows, and the kind of rustic charm that suggests generations of family gatherings and summer memories. Miles parks beside a stone fire pit and turns off the engine, and suddenly the silence feels different than it ever has between us. Heavier, more full of possibility. He looks at me across the car's interior and smiles, and I realize that whatever happens this weekend, whatever conversations we have or do not have, whatever truths emerge in the quiet spaces between morning coffee and evening fires, I am exactly where I need to be, even if I have no idea what that might cost me. The cabin weekend passes like a dream I am afraid to wake from. 2 days of morning coffee brewed over a camp stove, of hiking trails that wind through woods still bare from winter, of evenings spent reading by lamplight, while rain patters against windows that look out onto nothing but trees and darkness. It should feel like an ordinary friendship retreat, the kind of weekend getaway that college roommates take to escape the pressures of campus life. But it doesn't feel ordinary. Nothing about it feels ordinary. Miles moves through the cabin's small spaces with an easy domesticity that makes my chest tight with something I cannot name. He builds fires in the stone hearth with the kind of competence that suggests he has done this before, stacks wood, and arranges kindling with hands that know their work. He cooks simple meals on the ancient gas stove, pasta and canned sauce elevated somehow by the setting, by the way lamplight catches in his hair when he leans over the pot to taste for seasoning. I find myself watching him in ways I have trained myself not to watch him at home. Here, in this space that belongs to neither of us, the usual boundaries seem less solid, less necessary. When he laughs at something in the book he is reading, I let myself study the way his eyes crinkle at the corners. When he stretches his arms over his head after sitting too long, I allow my gaze to follow the line of his spine beneath his sweater. When he passes me a mug of coffee, I do not pull my hand away quickly when our fingers touch. On Saturday evening, after a dinner of grilled cheese and tomato soup that somehow tastes better than any restaurant meal I have ever eaten, Miles suggests we open the bottle of wine he brought. It is not expensive wine, the kind of bottle college students buy for special occasions that are not quite special enough to justify anything better. But he uncorks it with ceremony, pours it into mismatched glasses he finds in the cabin's small kitchen, and we settle on the couch in front of the fire like this is something we do regularly instead of something that feels monumentous and dangerous. The wine makes everything softer around the edges. The conversation flows more easily, touching on topics we usually avoid. Childhood memories that reveal more than we intend. Dreams for after graduation that neither of us has spoken aloud before. The kind of late-night intimacy that feels both inevitable and terrifying, like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing you have already taken the step that commits you to falling. Miles talks about his family, about the expectations he carries that mirror my own in uncomfortable ways, about the version of himself he presents to his parents, clean-cut and focused and safely conventional. About the growing sense that he is living someone else's life, wearing someone else's clothes, pretending to want things that feel foreign in his mouth when he tries to say them aloud. I recognize myself in his words, see my own careful performance reflected back at me. The dutiful son, the responsible student, the young man who calls home every week and assures his parents that everything is proceeding according to plan. We are both actors in the same play. I realize both performing versions of ourselves for audiences who would not recognize us if we ever dropped the masks. The fire burns lower as the evening stretches on, and eventually Miles moves to add another log. I watch him kneel in front of the hearth, his face lit orange by the flames, and something shifts inside my chest. Not the sudden recognition of attraction that has been growing quietly for months, so slowly I could pretend it was something else. This is different. This is the moment when pretending becomes impossible, when the careful distance I have maintained between my heart and my head collapses entirely. He is beautiful, not in the magazine perfect way that makes beauty safe and distant, but in the specific way that belongs only to him. The concentration on his face as he arranges the wood. The way he brushes ash from his hands when he finishes. The small smile he gives me when he settles back on the couch. Closer than before, close enough that I can feel the warmth from his skin. I love you too, I think, the words forming in my mind with such clarity that for a moment I'm terrified I have spoken them aloud. But Miles continues reading, continues existing in his own thoughts, unaware that I have just crossed some internal line I did not even realize I was approaching. The realization sits in my chest like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through everything I thought I knew about myself. This is not the desperate crush of adolescence or the careful attraction I have felt for classmates who remained safely distant. This is something else entirely. This is recognition. This is coming home to a place I never knew I had been searching for. When Miles suggests we sleep on the pull-out couch together rather than one of us taking the small bedroom, I agree without hesitation. We arrange blankets and pillows in a configuration that mirrors our usual sleeping arrangement, but everything feels different here. The sounds are different. Wind through trees instead of traffic, the settling of old wood instead of apartment building noises. The darkness is different too, complete in a way that city darkness never is, absolute and enveloping. We lie side by side in the unfamiliar bed, not touching but aware of each other in every nerve ending. Miles shifts beside me, and I wonder if he is thinking what I am thinking, feeling what I am feeling, if this weekend has been as much of a revelation for him as it has been for me. The silence stretches between us, full of words that neither of us speaks. But for the first time, it does not feel like the silence of things avoided. It feels like the silence of things acknowledged, understood, accepted without need for immediate action. I love you, Miles whispered 3 weeks ago in our narrow apartment bed, words spoken in a darkness that he thought would swallow them. I love you too, I think now in his cabin bed, words I am not yet brave enough to speak, but can finally admit to myself are true. The recognition changes everything and nothing. Tomorrow we will drive back to our regular lives, return to our careful routines, and maintain distances. But something fundamental has shifted during these 2 days. Some internal wall has cracked open to let in light I had not realized I was living without. I fall asleep listening to Miles breathe beside me, and for the first time in months, I do not lie awake counting heartbeats or analyzing the space between what is and what might be. I simply rest in the knowledge of what I feel, what I want, what I am finally brave enough to name, even if only to myself. We return from the cabin on Sunday evening, carrying the weight of everything we did not say. The drive back passes in comfortable silence, but it is a different kind of quiet than we shared on the way there. This silence feels full, pregnant with possibility and danger in equal measure. Miles plays music softly on the radio, and I watch the familiar landscape slide past the windows, small towns and farmland, giving way gradually to the outskirts of campus, to the world where we must resume being roommates instead of whatever we were becoming in that cabin by the lake. The apartment feels smaller when we return to it, cramped after 2 days of open sky and endless trees. Our books and papers are exactly where we left them, scattered across the kitchen table like evidence of the ordinary lives we stepped away from for a weekend. But everything looks different now, charged with new meaning. The couch where we maintain careful distance feels absurd after sharing a pull-out bed. The kitchen where we prepare separate meals seems unnecessarily formal after cooking together over a camp stove. I unpack my bag while Miles showers, folding clothes that still smell faintly of wood smoke and placing them in drawers that suddenly feel too organized, too separate. When he emerges from the bathroom with wet hair and wearing the same old sweatpants he always wears, something in my chest tightens with recognition. This is Miles. This is home. This is the person I love. The word no longer feels foreign when I think it. The weekend has worn away my defenses against my own feelings, and now love sits in my vocabulary like something that has always belonged there, natural and undeniable and terrifying in its simplicity. But Miles seems different after the shower, more distant than he was at the cabin. He busies himself with unpacking, with sorting through the mail that accumulated while we were away, with the small tasks of returning to normal life. I wonder if the weekend affected him the way it affected me, or if I imagine the intimacy that seemed to grow between us in that small space by the lake. We fall back into our routines with an ease that feels both comforting and wrong. Monday morning coffee, shared in companionable silence. Tuesday evening study sessions at the kitchen table. Wednesday night movie that we watch from opposite ends of the couch, maintaining the distance that has always defined our friendship, but now feels artificial, imposed rather than natural. The careful normalcy lasts exactly 2 weeks. I wake on a Thursday night to find the bed empty beside me, the sheets cool where Miles should be sleeping. The digital clock reads 2:47, the same green glow that witnessed his first whispered confession a month ago. I lie still for a moment, listening for sounds that might explain his absence. The shower is not running. The television is silent. But there is light coming from the kitchen, a soft yellow glow that spills under the bedroom door. I should stay in bed, should respect whatever solitude he is seeking in the middle of the night, should maintain the careful boundaries we have rebuilt since returning from the cabin. But something pulls me from the warmth of our shared bed, some instinct that this moment matters, that whatever is happening in our kitchen at nearly 3 in the morning cannot be ignored. I find him sitting at the kitchen table, still in the t-shirt and boxers he wears to sleep, his head cradled in his hands. He does not look up when I enter, does not acknowledge my presence, even though he must hear my bare feet on the linoleum floor. In the lamplight, he looks younger than his 22 years, vulnerable in a way that makes my heart clench with protective instinct. I sit across from him without speaking, the same chair I occupied during our study sessions, during our meals, during all the ordinary moments that make up our shared life. The table between us feels both too wide and too narrow, both protection and barrier, depending on how I choose to see it. We sit in silence for several minutes. I watch the way his shoulders rise and fall with each breath, the way his fingers press against his temples as though he can contain whatever thoughts are threatening to spill over. The refrigerator hums in the background. Somewhere in the building, a door closes with a soft thud that means another insomniac has given up on sleep. Finally, without lifting his head, Miles speaks into the space between his hands and the table surface. You weren't asleep, were you? It is not a question. It is acknowledgement of what we both know, what we have both been pretending not to know for weeks. That night a month ago, when he whispered into the darkness, I was awake. I heard him. I have been carrying his words like a secret ever since, like something precious and dangerous that I am afraid to examine too closely. I cannot answer immediately. My throat feels tight, my voice lost somewhere between honesty and the safety of continued pretense. The moment stretches between us, fragile as glass, and I know that whatever I say next will determine the shape of everything that follows. No, I finally whisper. I wasn't asleep. Miles raises his head then, looks at me across the small table with eyes that hold both fear and relief in equal measure. His face is pale in the lamplight, marked with the kind of exhaustion that comes from fighting yourself, rather than from lack of sleep. The acknowledgement hangs between us like a bridge neither of us is certain we want to cross, but is there now, solid and undeniable. He knows that I heard him. I know that he knows. The careful fiction we have maintained for a month crumbles in the space of those few words. Miles takes a breath that sounds like it might break him. When he speaks again, his voice is steady but quiet, the voice of someone who has rehearsed this moment in his mind countless times, but never believed it would actually arrive. I love you, he says, and this time he is looking directly at me when he says it. This time, there is no darkness to hide behind, no pretense of sleep to maintain, no way to pretend the words were meant for anyone other than me. The confession sits between us on the kitchen table like something physical, something that takes up space and demands acknowledgement. I look at Miles across that small distance and see everything I've been afraid to name reflected back at me. Love, want, fear, hope. The terrible vulnerability of offering your heart to another person and waiting to see if they will keep it safe or let it shatter. My hands are shaking when I reach across the table toward him. Not to touch, not yet, but to close some of the distance between us, to show him that I am not running, not retreating into the safety of denial or the comfort of pretense. I love you too, I say, and the words feel like coming home and jumping off a cliff simultaneously, like the most natural thing in the world and the most terrifying risk I have ever taken. Miles closes his eyes when I say it, relief flooding his features like someone who has been holding his breath underwater and finally been allowed to surface. When he opens them again, they are bright with tears he is too proud to let fall. We sit in the lamplight of our small kitchen and look at each other across the table, where we have shared so many ordinary meals, and everything changes forever. The words hang in the kitchen air between us like something fragile and newly born. I love you too. 3 words that feel both inevitable and impossible, that change everything and solve nothing simultaneously. Miles reaches across the table then, his fingers finding mine where they rest on the worn-wood surface, and the touch sends electricity through my entire body, even though we have touched countless times before. Brushed hands while passing coffee mugs, shoulders bumping while studying side by side, the casual contact of 2 people sharing a small space and smaller bed. But this touch is different. This touch carries intention, acknowledgement, the weight of truth finally spoken aloud. His fingers are warm against mine, slightly rough from the outdoor work he did last summer, familiar in a way that makes my heart race, even as it calms something restless that has been living in my chest for months. We sit like that for a long time, hands connected across the table, neither of us speaking because there is too much to say and no words adequate for the magnitude of what has just shifted between us. The lamp casts everything in golden light, makes the moment feel suspended outside normal time, like we exist in a bubble where consequences have not yet arrived and reality has not yet reasserted itself. But reality does reassert itself, as it always does. It comes in the form of my phone buzzing on the counter, a text from my mother reminding me about dinner plans for this weekend, about the girl from church she wants me to meet, about the life she has carefully orchestrated for me that has no room for what I have just confessed in this kitchen. It comes in the form of Miles pulling his hand away slowly, reluctantly, as though he too is remembering everything that waits outside this moment. The days that follow our confession are strange and weighted, full of a tension I cannot name. We move through our routines differently now, hyper-aware of each other in ways that make even simple interactions feel charged with significance. When Miles hands me coffee in the morning, our fingers linger against each other just a moment longer than necessary. When we study together at the kitchen table, I catch him looking at me over the top of his textbook with an expression I cannot decipher. But we do not talk about what we said that night. We do not acknowledge the shift that has occurred between us, do not discuss what it means or what comes next. Instead, we exist in a kind of liminal space, no longer just friends, but not yet whatever we might become, balanced precariously between the safety of denial and the terror of moving forward. The weight of unspoken questions presses down on everything we do. What does this mean for us? What does this mean for our families, our futures, the carefully constructed lives we have built around the expectation that we will follow predetermined paths? How do two young men who have spent their entire lives learning to hide significant parts of themselves suddenly learn to exist in truth? I find myself paralyzed by the magnitude of what acknowledging our love might require. It is not just about us, not just about two people who care for each other figuring out how to be together. It is about phone calls I will have to make to parents who will not understand, conversations with friends who might see me differently, the possibility of losing the approval and acceptance I have worked so hard to maintain my entire life. Miles seems to understand my fear without me having to articulate it. He gives me space to think, to process, to come to terms with what we have admitted to each other. But I can see the patience cost him something. I catch him sometimes looking at me with an expression that holds both hope and resignation, love and the terrible knowledge that love alone might not be enough to overcome everything that stands between us and actually being together. The breaking point comes on a Tuesday evening. We are washing dishes together after dinner, moving around each other in the small kitchen with the choreographed efficiency of two people who have learned to share space without collision. Miles is drying while I wash, and when I hand him a plate, our fingers touch just as they have touched a dozen times since our confession. But this time he does not let go immediately. This time he sets the plate aside and turns to face me fully, water still dripping from my hands onto the floor between us. "I cannot do this anymore," he says quietly. "I cannot pretend that nothing has changed when everything has changed. I cannot keep living in this space between what we said and what we are willing to do about it." His words hit me like cold water, shocking in their directness. I have been so focused on my own fear, my own internal struggle with what our confession means, that I have not fully considered what my hesitation is costing him. What it means to love someone who loves you back, but is too afraid to act on that love. I know what I am asking is not fair. Miles continues, his voice steady, but his hands shaking slightly where they grip the dish towel. I know this is complicated for you, for both of us. I know there are things to figure out, consequences to consider. But I also know that I cannot keep living like this, pretending to be just your roommate when what I feel for you is so much more than that. He pauses, takes a breath that sounds like it might break him. "I do not need you to have all the answers right now," he says. "I do not need you to call your parents tomorrow and explain everything or to make grand declarations about our future. But I need to know that you want to try. I need to know that what we said to each other that night meant something to you beyond just words spoken in a moment of vulnerability." The kitchen feels impossibly small suddenly, the air thick with everything I need to say and everything I'm afraid to say. Miles stands there looking at me with an expression that holds both love and ultimatum, and I realize that I have reached the moment I've been both dreading and hoping for since that night we spoke our truth. This is the choice I knew was coming from the moment I admitted my feelings. Not just the choice to love him, which I've already made whether I intended to or not, but the choice to act on that love despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, despite everything I might lose in the process. The silence stretches between us, full of the weight of everything that hangs in the balance. Miles waits for my answer with the kind of patience that comes from truly caring about what that answer will be, even knowing it might break his heart. And standing there in our small kitchen with dish soap still on my hands and love sitting heavy in my chest, I finally understand that some choices cannot be avoided forever, that some truths demand action rather than just acknowledgement. The question is whether I am brave enough to choose love over fear, whether I am ready to risk everything I have carefully constructed for the chance at something real. I look at Miles across the small space of our kitchen, dish soap drying on my hands, and feel something shift inside my chest like a lock finally turning. He stands there holding that dish towel with an expression that contains both infinite patience and the quiet desperation of someone who has reached the end of what he can carry alone. His question hangs between us, simple and impossible. Do I want to try? The answer rises in me, not as words, but as certainty, as recognition of something I have known for months but been too afraid to claim. Yes, I want to try. Yes, I want to choose him, choose us, choose the terrifying possibility of building something real together despite everything we risk losing in the process. I step closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough to smell the familiar scent of the soap he uses and the coffee we shared after dinner. When I reach up to touch his face, my hands are still damp from washing dishes, but he does not pull away. Instead, he leans into the touch like someone who has been waiting his entire life for permission to be held. I want to try, I tell him, my voice barely above a whisper, but steady in a way that surprises me. I am terrified of what that means, terrified of everything we will have to face, but I want to try. The relief that floods his features is so profound it makes my chest tight with emotion. He covers my hand with his own, pressing my palm more firmly against his cheek, and for a moment we simply stand there in the golden light of our small kitchen, holding each other through touch and gaze and the weight of what we have just committed to together. When we kiss, it is soft and careful and tinged with disbelief, as though we are both still adjusting to the idea that this is allowed, that we can touch each other with intention rather than accident, with love rather than mere proximity. His lips are warm and slightly chapped from the dry spring air, and when he pulls me closer, I can feel his heart beating fast against my chest, matching the rhythm of my own. The kiss ends naturally, without urgency or the need for more immediate than what we are ready to give. We rest our foreheads together, breathing the same air, and I understand that this is what contentment feels like. Not the dramatic passion of movies or novels, but the quiet recognition of being exactly where you belong with exactly the person you choose. We finish the dishes together, but everything feels different now. When our hands brush passing plates, it is deliberate rather than careful. When our shoulders bump while moving around each other, it is affection rather than accident. The space between us is closed in ways that go beyond physical proximity, and I find myself marveling at how natural it feels, how right, as though we have simply stopped pretending to be something we were never actually supposed to be. That night, when we go to bed in our narrow apartment bed, I do not lie at the very edge pretending to need space I do not want. Instead, I settle close enough to feel Miles's warmth, and when he turns toward me in the darkness, I do not turn away. We do not make grand declarations or discuss the future in concrete terms. We simply exist together in the quiet contentment of no longer having to hide what we feel. Morning comes with spring light filtering through our single window, softer and warmer than the harsh winter sun we have been living with for months. I wake to find Miles already awake beside me, watching me with an expression of wonder that makes me feel both seen and cherished. "Good morning," he says simply, and the words contain everything we do not need to say aloud. That we chose each other, that we are here, that this is real. We make coffee together in our small kitchen, moving around each other with the same efficiency we have always maintained but without the careful distance. When Miles hands me my mug, he drops a kiss on my temple as naturally as breathing, and I understand that we are learning a new language together, the language of casual affection and comfortable intimacy. There will be difficult conversations ahead, phone calls to make, explanations to give, people who will not understand, and some who may choose not to accept what we have found together. There will be moments of doubt and fear, times when the path forward seems unclear or the cost feels too high. Love does not solve everything, does not erase the complications of living authentically in a world that often demands conformity. But sitting at our kitchen table with morning light spilling across the wormwood surface, with Miles's hand resting casually over mine as we drink our coffee and plan our day, I understand that some risks are worth taking. Some truths are worth living. Some love is worth choosing despite fear, despite uncertainty, despite everything that would be easier to maintain in silence. We are 21 and 22, still figuring out who we are and who we want to become. We have no roadmap for what comes next, no guarantee that choosing love will lead to the kind of future we are supposed to want. But we have this moment, this morning, this quiet contentment of finally allowing ourselves to exist in truth. Miles raises our joined hands to his lips, presses a soft kiss to my knuckles, and smiles at me across the table where we have shared so many ordinary meals that have become extraordinary simply because we shared them together. Outside our window, the world continues its familiar rhythms. But inside our small apartment, everything has changed. We have chosen each other. We have chosen truth over safety, love over fear, the terrifying beauty of authenticity over the comfortable prison of expectation. And for now, in this moment bathed in spring light and the quiet contentment of no longer having to pretend, that choice feels like everything we need. The rest, we will figure out together.